This is Dan Shea with Veterans for Peace Forum, and today is a little bit different. Usually I have a guest on, but I just came back from a trip to Vietnam. It was a Veterans for Peace 2018 tour to Vietnam during the 50th anniversary of the Tet Offensive and My Lai Massacre. We were there for 18 days, and it's a long time, and I've been struggling to try and put this together for you. I mean, how do you put 18 days together in an hour? You know, it's not an easy thing. Kind of wanted just to give you an idea. I mean, in the year 1968, we saw the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King and Bobby Kennedy, riots, I would say uprisings rather than riots, and resistance in short, a country that was severely divided over the war, race, class, and culture. It saw the election of Richard Nixon, who proved to be a crook, according to this paper, but I am not a crook. In Vietnam, the year included the January siege of Khe Sanh, the February Tet Offensive, the March 16th My Lai Massacre, and May the Mini Tet, unprecedented bombing of North Vietnam, the most spraying of Agent Orange, and much, much more. And at the beginning of the year, some 20,000 Americans had been killed in the war. By the end, another 17,000 Americans were killed, as were an untold number of Vietnamese, Laos, and Cambodians. As you know, one of the most important parts of this tour is going to be that we're going to be there for the March 16th. We were going to be there for the March 16th My Lai celebration, or I should say sober opening of a pagoda in reverence to the fallen in My Lai. It's actually Sun Mai Village province area there, and it's the site of the My Lai Massacre. Very powerful thing. But we started off, and I kind of wanted to give you an idea how it started. You know, we started on March 4th. We arrived at the Noi Bai Airport in Hanoi, and from there we went and took a bus to our hotel, and it was the beginning of our first part of the trip. And the first part of the trip was basically just checking into the hotel, going out for dinner, and taking a little bit of walk around the neighborhood there. They cut off traffic in the evening so that people can just walk around the area. It's very much a tourist section of the town in Hanoi. And down the street, just a short walk away, is the Ho Kim Lake. It's the lake around in Hanoi that's pretty famous. That's where, you know, the giant tortoise, who had actually just died some years ago, a couple of years ago, a mythological creature that happened to be real. But the myth is that when the war started, the tortoise came out with a sword to fight and battle the emperor, Chinese emperors, and anybody that came to the country. And when the war was over, the tortoise took the sword back and into the lake, and they would have peace. So this is you'll find in the Buddhist temples. You'll find a number of pliffs with prayers and tributes to the tortoise, and so you see a lot of those in many of the areas that you go. I wanted to start off with a couple of videos, and so the first video, I believe, is with one of the things we're doing is we're meeting people that came from across the country. There was about 40 of us on this tour, which is a pretty big project for our Vietnam Chapter 160 to kind of host that. They hired a Vietnamese travel agency, local, keep the money within the community. We each raised $1,000 extra that would go to various projects, Project Renew, which does unexploded ordnances. They've been cleaning those up over the years. They've been very successful. And plus they train people like children. Don't pick up these little things that may look like toys but are actually bombs. And people have been killed over the years. And you want to make sure that they understand that just report those. They call Project Renew. Project Renew will go out and they will corner off the area so that nobody's around close by. And they will either, if it's one of these smaller bombs, what they'll do is they have to explode it right there. If it's a different kind of ordnance, they will pick it up and they will ship it to a place where they'll put them all together and explode them together. So that's one thing that they do. The other is that there are a number of people that are dealing with the issue of Agent Orange. And as many people know, this was quite a tour for me because I'm an Agent Orange survivor. I've told people before, the story is over and over again while I was in Vietnam about the death of my son when he was 3 years old to a heart surgery that went bad. I don't want to go through that whole story again. It's very emotional, especially after this trip. But just to let you know that that's one of the reasons I was there. And we would visit various places that were caring for the children. Like one near Hanoi was Friendship Village. Becky Looney, who is one of the board members there that raises money, lives here in Portland, been very active over the years, and she continues to raise money on various occasions to send money to that community, where they care for children, teach parents and others how to care for children. Some of those are like Down syndrome children, some have lost limbs and legs, but this is an area in which they also educate. People learn computers, learn a trade, something to keep them so that they advance. Some actually become very proficient in the skills that they learned in computer, go on to college, and I've been actually testified before Congress here about Agent Orange. So there are many, many ways in which you can help. Another hospital we went to, community, was one in which the children had hearing problems, some mental deficiencies, but otherwise they were, just loving children. We went to see them, and they did a performance for us. So that was something. I think we have a video on that too. And I wanted to say, then when we went to My Lai, when we finally went to My Lai, we had about 60 veterans, anti-war activists, and others that came for that event. So it expanded our group of 40 to about 60. Some of those that came were actually people who deserted in 1967. One from Laos was in Laos at the time, and eventually went to Sweden. So these are people who early on saw that what our country was doing was inappropriate. It was murderous in a sense that they knew the people, they knew what was going on the ground, they knew that our government was lying to them about what was going on, and they decided they could not be involved in killing the Vietnamese people, and they therefore refused and left the country. So in the end, we come to a point in time where we gather at the very end of our tour at Ho Chi Minh City at the War Remnants Museum. In the War Remnants Museum, there is an exhibit called Waging Peace, put together by Ron Carver, who brought this exhibit together and brought some of these GI resistors to meet with their Vietnamese counterparts, and in an incredible exhibit in which they produced a number of pieces of underground papers, handed those over for the archives of the War Remnants Museum. It was an incredible show, and And I don't think I have very much to show you on that, but we will have an opportunity to take a look at some of the people who actually were there. So first of all, let's start off with one of our videos, our first video, and you'll get a chance to hear J.J. Johnson, who is one of these deserters.
Bác Trương với tôi hai thầy trò, hai nhân vật với nhau nhiều năm. Tôi là Phạm Văn Trương, tôi 84 tuổi. Theo một nghĩa nào đó thì tôi cũng là lão thầy. Tôi cũng là cựu.
Our get together is taking place at a time when the My Lai massacre 50th anniversary is coming near.
Chúng ta gặp nhau vào thời điểm khi mà kỷ niệm 50 năm vụ thảm sát My Lai sắp tới.
So allow me to make a few remarks in relation to that event.
Cho nên cho phép tôi nói đôi ý kiến liên quan đến sự kiện đó.
First, the brave intervention.
Thứ nhất, sự can thiệp dũng cảm.
The number of My Lai victims is high.
Số nạn nhân của vụ thảm sát My Lai là rất lớn.
Estimates vary from one source to another, with 504 being the most commonly cited figure.
Số liệu về nạn nhân bị thảm sát thì mỗi nguồn nó một khác, nhưng cái con số mà được nhiều nguồn dẫn nhất là con số 504 nạn nhân.
This figure would have been much higher had it not been for the courageous intervention of 3 American servicemen.
That's right.
Con số thương vong lẽ ra còn lớn hơn thế rất nhiều nếu như không có sự can thiệp dũng cảm của 3 chiến binh Mỹ lúc đó.
They were pilot Hugh Thompson,
Đó là phi công Hugh Thompson,
gunner Larry Colburn,
tay súng Larry Colburn
and crew chief Jonathan Androta.
và Jonathan Kuta.
They landed their helicopter between unarmed villagers on the one side and the trigger-happy soldiers of Company C or Charlie Company on the other side. These soldiers of this company had by then killed hundreds of villagers.
Họ đã đổ trực thăng hạ trực thăng xuống ở giữa hai đám người. Một bên là những người dân thường, dân làng tay không vũ khí. Một bên kia là lính của đại đội C, tức là đại đội Charlie của Mỹ, là những người mà trước đó đã tàn sát hàng trăm người Việt Nam rồi.
The 3 men succeeded finally to persuade the soldiers to stop shooting.
3 người lính đó cuối cùng đã thành công trong việc ngăn những người lính của đại đội C bắn tiếp những người dân làng.
Androta was killed in the war just 3 weeks after My Lai.
Andrei Kota thì sau 3 tuần sau vụ My Lai đã bị tử trận.
Thompson died in 2006
Thompson chết vào năm 2006
and Colburn in 2016.
và Colburn chết năm 2016.
But they will be remembered by many Vietnamese for their conscience and their courage.
Nhưng rất nhiều người Việt Nam vẫn còn nhớ tới họ nhờ sự dũng cảm và lương tri của họ.
My second remark concerns the process of uncovering My Lai.
Và điểm thứ hai của tôi là xin nói về quá trình phơi trần vụ My Lai.
Also remembered by many Vietnamese will be another American helicopter gunner.
Và trong trí óc của người Việt Nam, nhiều người Việt Nam cũng còn nhớ đến một tay súng khác của Mỹ.
It's Ron Ridenhour.
Đó là Ron Ridenhour.
Ridenhour uncovered the massacre 1 year afterwards.
Một năm sau khi xảy ra vụ My Lai, Adenauer đã phát hiện ra tố giác vụ này.
He first received with skepticism only stories told by friends, and then quietly investigated on his own.
Khi được bạn bè nói về vụ thảm sát này, anh ấy nghe một cách nghi ngờ và anh lẳng lặng một mình đi điều tra tìm hiểu vụ này.
He flew several times over My Lai and gathered eyewitness and participant accounts from many other countries.
Anh ấy đã bay tới My Lai nhiều lần và đã tìm hiểu, đã hỏi, đã phỏng vấn, thu thập bằng chứng từ những người dân cũng như những khác tham gia vào vụ đó.
But as he later put it, he had to wait until he was out of the service to blow the whistle because he feared for his life.
Nhưng như anh ấy đã kể lại là phải sau khi anh ấy rời quân ngũ, anh mới có thể tố giác về việc này, bởi vì nếu tố giác lúc còn trong quân ngũ thì có thể mệnh hệ đến đời, đến cuộc sống.
In March 1969, he wrote a long letter to the US President, Defense Secretary, State Secretary, Joint Chiefs of Staff, and 30 members of Congress, detailing the My Lai event and asking for a public investigation.
Tháng 10 năm 1969, anh ấy đã viết một bức thư dài gửi cho Tổng thống Mỹ, gửi cho Bộ trưởng Ngoại giao Mỹ, gửi cho Bộ trưởng Quốc phòng Mỹ, gửi cho Tổng tham mưu trưởng Liên quân Mỹ, Chủ tịch Hội đồng Liên quân Mỹ và 30 nghị sĩ Mỹ để tố giác về vụ này.
His letter was ignored by almost all recipients, with the exception of only one member of Congress.
Hầu hết tất cả những người nhận thư của anh ấy đã làm ngơ bức thư của anh ấy, trừ một người duy nhất là một người trong đám nghị sĩ đó.
It's Representative Morris Udall, Democrat of Arizona.
Đó là Udall, là nghị sĩ từ bang Arizona.
Representative Udall asked for an investigation,
Và nghị sĩ Udall yêu cầu phải tiến hành một cuộc điều tra.
and this led to a 10-month-long trial during which details of the My Lai mass murder were disclosed.
Và chính yêu cầu ấy và cuộc điều tra ấy yêu cầu ấy đã dẫn đến cuộc điều tra kéo dài 10 tháng và đưa ra rất nhiều bằng chứng cụ thể.
Allow me to mention here also an American journalist, Seymour Hersh.
Tôi cũng xin đề cập ở đây tên một nhà báo Mỹ, ông Seymour Hersh.
Hersh got hold of a whole set of photographs about My Lai and had extensive conversations with related persons.
Seymour Hersh đã có rất nhiều ảnh cũng như là phim quay về tiếp xúc những bằng chứng liên quan những người liên quan vụ My Lai.
But he waited for 18 months before having the photos published.
Nhưng phải mất 18 tháng sau khi chờ đợi thì anh ấy mới công bố các ảnh của mình.
First on the St. Louis Post-Dispatch,
Thứ nhất, lần đầu tiên là công bố bức ảnh ở trên tờ St. Louis Dispatch
in November 1969.
tháng 11 năm 1969.
And then the 20th of November the same year, the Time, Life, and Newsweek magazines started covering the story.
Và cũng là trong tháng 11 năm 1969 đó thì 3 tạp chí rất nổi tiếng của Mỹ là tờ Time, tờ Life và tờ Newsweek cũng bắt đầu đăng tải những bức ảnh đó.
This prompted widespread condemnation around the world and brought Seymour Hersh the 1970 Pulitzer Prize for International Reporting.
Tất cả những bức ảnh những thông tin mà Simon Hirsch công bố đã thu hút sự chú ý, quan tâm của dư luận và đồng thời cũng đem lại cho Simon Hirsch giải thưởng Pulitzer về báo chí năm 1970.
I should not fail to recall that we Vietnamese had promptly denounced the mass murder, but only our denunciation was squarely dismissed as pure communist propaganda.
Hồi đó chúng tôi cũng đã tố giác về cái vụ này cho dư luận thế giới, nhưng người ta chỉ thuần túy coi chúng tôi là tuyên truyền cộng sản.
At that time, I was working as a reporter for the Liberation Press Agency, a jungle-based media of the South Vietnam National Front for Liberation, or Viet Cong, as you call it at the time.
Hồi đó tôi đang là phóng viên của cơ quan thông tấn xã Giải Phóng mà trụ sở là ở trong rừng. Trụ sở của nó cũng như là lực của chúng tôi đó là lực lượng quân giải phóng mà các vị gọi là Việt Cộng.
We broadcast a series of stories with many details about the massacre.
Chúng tôi đã công bố rất nhiều chi tiết thông tin liên quan đến vụ tàn sát này.
And our stories were relayed by the Hanoi-based Vietnam News Agency, which was much more powerful.
Và những thông tin, những bài viết của chúng tôi đã được Thông tấn xã Việt Nam đặt cơ sở tại trụ sở tại Hà Nội, tức là mà Thông tấn xã Việt Nam là cơ quan mạnh hơn chúng tôi rất nhiều, đã chuyển tiếp những bài này cho thế giới.
Personally, I had the opportunity to accompany a My Lai survivor, myself as an interpreter, for this 13-year-old girl on visits to different European and Latin American countries.
Cá nhân tôi, với tư cách của phóng viên cũng như là với tư cách của phiên dịch, đã được có dịp may mắn là đi tháp tùng một trong số những người còn sống sót của My Lai, một cô bé lúc đó 39 tuổi, 13 tuổi tới các nước, một số nước ở châu Âu và Mỹ Latin.
If you are going to My Lai Memorial in the coming days, perhaps you will see her name there. She afterwards were sent to the north for university studies. She became a medical doctor, and after 75, she returned to My Lai and was made director of the My Lai Memorial.
Trong vài ngày tới, tôi biết là các vị sẽ vào thăm My Lai. Và vào đó thì các vị thấy có thể tên của cô này vẫn còn ở đó. Và lúc đó thì cô ấy đã được đưa ra phía Bắc để học đại học, rồi cô học ngành y, tốt nghiệp trở thành bác sĩ, cô ấy đã trở về đó và hiện nay thì cô ấy là giám đốc của lúc đó sau khi mà trở về My Lai thì cô được giám đốc của cái nhà tưởng niệm My Lai.
Her name was Võ Thị Liên, but she's no longer alive.
Tên của cô ấy là Võ Thị Liên, tiếc rằng bây giờ cô đã qua đời.
We told our local audiences about what happened in My Lai.
Chúng tôi đã nói cho mọi người ở những nơi tôi ở biết về chuyện My Lai.
They showed quite a lot of sympathy and solidarity.
Những người nghe chúng tôi kể thì thể hiện rất là thiện cảm, rất là có cảm tình và đoàn kết với chúng tôi.
But I did feel deep in my heart that they were not convinced of our story.
Nhưng tôi cảm thấy rất rõ ràng, tự tâm của mình tôi cảm thấy rất rõ ràng là họ nghe, họ thiện cảm như vậy thôi, nhưng họ không tin vào những chuyện chúng tôi kể về My Lai.
At best, không được thuyết phục.
Không được thuyết phục.
At best, they might think that some wrongdoing had actually been committed.
Người ta có lẽ trong đầu người ta thì người ta chỉ nghĩ rằng có thể có chuyện gì sai ở đây, làm chuyện không hay ở đây.
But they thought that we Vietnamese might exaggerate things, trying to make a mountain out of an anthill.
Nhưng mà có lẽ là mấy cái vị Việt Nam đang kể chuyện này cũng chẳng qua là thổi phồng sự thật lên, làm cho chuyện từ bé xé thành to mà thôi.
Perhaps the crime was too unbelievable and the story to be believed.
Nhưng có lẽ là do tội ác ấy nó lớn tới mức, nó nghiêm trọng tới mức mà người ta không thể tưởng tượng là nó có thật.
Fortunately, what that we Vietnamese had told the world but discarded became believable as it was uncovered by Americans themselves.
Nhưng rất may là những chuyện mà tưởng rằng không có thật, tưởng rằng là những chuyện do người Việt Nam ngụy tạo dựng nên thì lại là do chính những người Mỹ đã tìm ra và đã chứng minh nó.
Thus, Simmerhurst and Ron Adenauer deserve being remembered too.
Và chính nhờ cái điều đó mà Simmerhurst và Adenauer là những người mà đáng được chúng tôi và tất cả chúng ta cùng nhớ.
My third and last remark was the unexpected impact of the crime.
Điều thứ ba mà tôi muốn nói đó là tác động không thể hình dung nổi về của cái vụ này.
By giving orders for the massacre.
Okay, that was just to give you a little idea of some of the events that we were at. As you can see, we had to go through translations for both the Vietnamese. If somebody was speaking English, they would have somebody translate in Vietnamese, and vice versa. This was a pretty important meeting. This was supposed to be an open discussion where anybody could say whatever they needed to say, and it was an opportunity for people to move forward. This gentleman was bringing forward the facts about the My Lai massacre, and there was a touch of anger in his voice as he proceeded. I think the rest of the council there was not quite prepared for that, and there began a major discussion. The man sitting to the right of him was one of the veterans on tour, Dennis Van Hoof. He was born and raised in Wisconsin, and was a Marine in he spent, as he said, he had been active with VFP tours for 7 years. His first had been, he's talking about somebody else, I'm sorry. Dennis was from Wisconsin and was Marine Corps and was stationed at Cherry Point. There was a time when we went to Hill 55, was an area in which he had served on the top of this hill overlooking the villages, which now has grown up into cities all around, but at the time was a high point of a hill in which was constantly under attack by the Vietnamese as the Marines were trying to hold on to that hill, and eventually was was taken, of course. Now, Dennis is a little more conservative than a lot of us with Veterans for Peace, and he began to have when he spoke up in ways in which he was saying that he never intended to kill anybody, that they were battling an enemy, that they were trying to fight for democracy. I think that sped off into many different conversations. And if we think about the war, many of us from VFP would say that many people went because they thought they were defending democracy. They thought they were halting communism from the so-called domino theory. But we began to, many of us learned that first we didn't believe that. Many became to learn that later on, that that was a myth and lie, that we weren't defending democracy. If we were defending democracy, we would have allowed the Vietnamese to choose their own government, and when Ho Chi Minh declared independence, we would have not have interfered. These are the things that we have to understand. Now, I think Dennis in the end was trying to say that's what he meant to say, is that he believed he was, but it came out that they were fighting for democracy, that they were fighting against the communists taking over. And that led to a pretty heated discussion, one in which I myself spoke out in, and although I was not videotaped, I was a bit angry at the time and said, you know, no, we were lied to. We went into a war. We killed 4 million Vietnamese or more, and we left Agent Orange and other chemical herbicides that have created birth defects affecting some 4 million Vietnamese, hundreds of thousands of people with illnesses, and still hotspots in various areas, and not to speak of the tons of weapons and bombs that we dropped on North Vietnam and around the country, and which they are still trying to clean up. A farmer could be going out plowing his field and hit one of those, and they explode and kill them or his family or children. So these are the legacies of the war, and we should never have been there. And that was my position. And I was a bit angry at the time, but as we get to know each other, we begin to understand each other as both veterans with various levels of understanding and history behind them. But as you may have guessed, that people who have suffered the trauma of losing somebody, it's hard to get over the anger. You have to have a reason why you were there. The problem is, the reason many of us suffer with post-traumatic stress and moral injury is because those so-called excuses just don't seem to fit. And because they don't fit, we are troubled by the very reasons we went to war. And if you come down to it, and many of Veterans for Peace members, war itself is the crime. There are no good guys in a war. There are people that are defending their country and their land against an invader. But even in that situation, we are dealing with people killing each other, and you suffer from that internally and morally. So that's something we need to talk a little bit about. When veterans today, I just, you know, I'm trying to relate how these things all relate in the world today. Violence is what our government tells us is how we solve problems. And as you know, today there were people that were meeting at Pioneer Square to march around against the use of military-type weapons that were used in war, that students from Florida, the school in which a number of people were killed, the students have stood up and said that we need to get rid of these military weapons, these AK-47s, these automatic weapons that are used for killing, and often used in war. So they shouldn't be on the streets, and we oppose that thing. So I'm sorry I wasn't able to be there today. I wished I could have been there, but I had to prepare for this show. And I see that these things are interconnected. Until we can learn to say that that violence is not the answer to the solution, then maybe people that even have mental problems and weapons are not available to them, we'll start teaching a different kind of culture, a culture that says that we need to learn how to negotiate peacefully to solve our problems. And through diplomacy, through international scale, personally we need to understand each other and take a good look at what the arguments really are about. Is it worth killing somebody over something personal? I don't think so. And I think we need to start thinking about how we build a country full of a culture of peace. Now, one of the things that I learned about the Vietnamese, just imagine, you know, we're talking about, when we're talking about My Lai, there were 104 men, women, and children, mainly elderly men, women and children, and infants that were literally slaughtered by an army company that went into a village of unarmed civilians and slaughtered them, dragging some out of their hooches, throwing them into the ditch, and using machine guns on them. Now that is a war crime. And the worst part of that whole thing is not just that My Lai seems to be the big one that everybody knows about, because Seymour Hersh and the media began to report these things in the media, and people in 1967, 8, 68 is when it happened. So 69 and 70, these reports started to come out, and investigations began, and people realized that this was an atrocity. It was the beginning of people turning against the war, but it was only one of a number of My Lais. A book by Nick Turse called Kill Anything That Moves will tell you in his own investigations of the Pentagon's own papers and research and investigations, showed a number of similar types of massacres that took place. So we have to think about what is it in the culture of war that turns young men and now women, but young men that went to war, perfectly going there because they believed they were going to save people from some dictatorship, some kind of government that they were told and that was an oppressive government, that they were going to defend those people and bring them to and liberate them. Well, that's a disturbing thought when you think about this these people turned from supposedly believing that they were going to be saviors to people that were slaughtering the very people that they decided they were going to go there to save. What turns somebody into that? War itself seems to pervert the will and the human spirit into one of violence and something that goes wild in somebody, almost like a lynch mob. And I think this is something that we have to begin to analyze in a way in which, why do people go to war in the first place? What is it that leads these young men or women in these cases now to go to war? When you go to boot camp, the first thing that they try to do is they break you down. They begin to terrorize you in a sense. It's like hazing. That sort of hazing is a form of brainwashing. The brainwashing is to get you to learn to obey orders. Those orders are, you don't decide whether you're going to kill somebody or not. They teach you to kill on command. Now, these men that went into My Lai were told in the very beginning that this was going to be an operation in which they were going to be probably going to take heavy casualties. In taking heavy casualties, because this was an outpost for the North Vietnamese and Viet Cong, and that they would be coming up against heavy fighting, and that when they go in there, they were under orders to kill anything that moves. Under orders to kill anything that moves. Now that is what they went into. They did not come up against any opposition, but they continued to move forward after many excuses saying that they were under orders to do so. So I want to leave that there for right now. But I wanted to then come back to some of the things that I was just saying. How do we build culture of peace? Well, the Vietnamese, after all of that, welcomed us with open arms, with smiles and hugs. These were former soldiers that fought against us. These were families that were victims. These were children, families that were taking care of children that were severely deformed because of Agent Orange. And yet they came around, they gave us hugs, they treated us with such respect. I didn't ask for forgiveness per se, because I don't think we deserve forgiveness, but they forgave us anyhow. That's a spirit in which I think we have a new beginning. And they kept talking about the war there's an end to this war, and that we need to move forward. And all around the country you could see that the country was changing. Things that I had seen when I was there in 1968 were no longer there. These buildings were being put up. Businesses were everywhere. Even when I went back in 2006 for Agent Orange Conference, already had changed. I just talked with some people. Beachfront corporations are going in and buying up land along the beaches of Vietnam, which are displacing the indigenous peoples there and their access to those beaches. So there is this constant battle between the development of a country, it's expanding its base in trade internationally, and the idea of corruption that continues to grow with what I call corporate capitalism. And so it's not that the war, that anybody really won the war. It's like they were dealing with the same issues over and over again. But the one thing we can do is come together in peace and work to try and save and help those children that were devastated by Agent Orange, clean up the unexploded ordinances, and to there are hot spots of Agent Orange still. Da Nang has been gone through a process of being cleaned up, but there are other hot spots that exist, and we need to get our government to put up some funds to try and clean up some of this area to make it safer for people so they're not re-exposed to Agent Orange. So I want to kind of just give you an idea of what it looks like in Vietnam. So I want to show a few pictures, and if Jim can put up some pictures, and I can kind of talk about them as we go through them, the best that I can. It's I'm a little bit nervous because like I said, I just got back. Now this was, I can't remember if this was at the Hue Citadel. These were children at one of the places where Agent Orange, they were Agent Orange victims, and some of those children had been abandoned. Other children had, they were doing a performance for us in sign language. Many of them were deaf. And one of the things that we were hoping for is that one of the ideas is maybe we can get to people who have unused hearing aids. We can put those together, find a way of maybe even talking to the VA of unused or returned hearing aids, create some kind of way to collect them and deliver them to Vietnam to help these children so that they can, some of them can hear, but they have great difficulty in hearing. So we can advance their abilities to hear. The next photo is actually sort of on the parade grounds of, you can go ahead and go to the next one, if it'll go there. Now this was at the Ho Chi Minh Mausoleum. We were sort of a parade ground where they had the military there. You couldn't take pictures, supposedly. I think I snuck one out of here. When you go into the building, the mausoleum itself, this is where they have Ho Chi Minh laid out, preserved. Though he didn't want that to happen, the people there wanted that to happen. So he is laid out and sort of mummified in a sense. And you walk through there and silently go through there. We can't take pictures inside. But this is sort of the parade ground around the mausoleum, and there were a number of people there visiting. This is us entering it. We have I'm trying to think of Eric. Eric is the gentleman in white hair in the background. Mark talking with Sabiha, who is a doctor with the VA, who also came on this trip. These are incredibly wonderful people, and as we get to know each other, Sabiha would be taking care of us old veterans. I had a real problem of my legs, my ankles swelling up. You know, not hydrating enough. Although I drank lots of water, didn't have enough potassium, had to eat lots of bananas in order to keep draining the swelling in my legs, and it became painful after a while. But she was there helping people make sure that we were being taken care of, and she was learning a lot, and we're really happy that she was there with us. You can go to the next photo. There's the mausoleum. There's the Ho Chi Minh Mausoleum. Huge. Go ahead. This is us leaving. Go ahead. Now this is also looking back at some other buildings in which military and dignitaries would be housed in that area, and we're just walking past, and I took a photo of that. You can go on. Now this is interesting. We put us all together, and you'll see some of these women in their various cultural costumes. These were other people that were visiting the mausoleum, and they came running over to our veterans group here, and as we took a group picture, and they joined us. And this is what I mean by the Vietnamese coming and with open hands and open hearts to meet with us, to talk with us, to learn what we were there for. Very, very good. You can go on. Here's one of those women that came here. The gentleman who has his hand around her shoulder is actually, you can't see him right there, is Keith Mathers, who was also a GI resistor, who was in Presidio blockade for refusing to go to Vietnam, and eventually, after somebody had been killed and they held a protest, Keith actually escaped from the Presidio and left and went to Europe. There we are. There's another young Vietnamese woman who came over, decided to take a picture with us, and again, look at the smiles. There was just another one of those pictures. And the woman in blue is Rachel. Rachel lives in Vietnam, and she was sort of a guide to us on some of the issues and protocols for how to behave and to understand oftentimes what we were seeing, which was unfamiliar to us. You know, we were taking pictures, but she helped explain a lot to it for us. Well, there's a smiley face. Now, one of the reasons I went to Vietnam was I was hoping that we would find this old church that I used to sleep in when I was in Vietnam in 1968. I got there in August of 1968, so it was well after Tet and My Lai. But I was just off of Hai Van Pass, north of Da Nang, and there was an old church that was there, kind of bombed out. Looked a lot like this in a lot of ways, but a little more stretched out, I think a little bit larger. And people thought this was a church I might be in, but it wasn't the same church. As you go on to the next picture, you'll see some more here. Again, go to another picture. Okay, so this is the Long Hong Church, and I believe in 1972, in 1972, it was attacked and bombed out. Now, one of the things about this church that I recognized was that it wasn't up against a mountainside. The church that I was at, I would sleep in at night or on the outside, was one that was up against the side of the mountain. And this was actually more in a field, so I knew that wasn't the same church. So I'm still left with some unresolved issues. I was hoping that this trip would bring back some memories that I could kind of lay to rest for my own psychological issues and my post-traumatic stress, but I didn't quite get there. Although this helped in some ways, because the country's changing. You can see how the church was bombed out. Looks an awful lot like the same church, but it's not. Now this is in Ho Chi Minh. Ho Chi Minh. This is in Hanoi, and again, this is I'm just trying to look here. What is this? The Ho Kim Lake. That's Hoankiem Lake. This is the lake at night, and just absolutely beautiful. And it's a couple of miles around the lake. You can follow it around. I think there's another picture as you go around. As we're at the lake, there were a lot of weddings that were going on. This was actually across from the lake. There's this shopping mall, but it was all lit up, and they were taking wedding pictures in front of the mall. But it all lit up, and I just couldn't resist taking that picture. So this was one of them. Again, this is another look at the lake, and there's a little pagoda that goes out off that bridge. It was closed, so I couldn't go to that. In the morning, I would get up and actually walk down to the lake. People were exercising. There were people that were doing a dance performance. They were preparing for some kind of performance. People were walking, jogging, walking their dog. I actually went down and went for a long walk and did my Tai Chi while I was there. And it was one way in which trying to stay healthy and calm with all this bustle of cars and motorcycles. One thing that you notice in Vietnam is that there are hundreds of motorcycles going by like a stream, like a river, and you can barely cross the street. We were told that if you cross the street, do not stop or you'll get hit. Do not run or you'll get hit. Just walk steadily and they'll find their way around you. And it was bizarre, I'm telling you. They say that there, if there's a green light, it means go. If there's a yellow light, it means go faster. If it's a red light, go even faster. So it's, and it is very much true. You have to be very careful. There are a lot of accidents. This was a street scene again in Hanoi, just outside our hotel. In the morning, people will be riding their bicycles and motorcycles. You can go ahead. Again, people would, there were a lot of markets all along the street, people with flowers and fruits and riding their motorcycle, bringing them to market. Okay. Again, here you can see another person pushing either their cycle, bicycle, or motorcycle with fruits and vegetables that they'll be selling. Go ahead. And that's it? Wow, we came to the end of it. So we're getting pretty close. I was hoping to show more videos, and one thing we might do is, if you see the video there that that says J.J. Johnson on it, if you could put that up, I wouldn't even mind going out with that, because I think it's an important one. This is one of the war resistors who we were having dinner and was giving a little bit of a history of it. If you can find that video, that would be great. Should say, yeah.
Lived all over the world, had all kinds of jobs, and he kept his eye on the ball, and he never wavered. And that really impressed me, because when I entered the military, I really was not political. My dad was a militant trade unionist, but I remember in 1963 he asked me if I'd like to go with him to the March on Washington, and I said, what for? I told another story to Ron. I don't know if you remember in 1964, the 3 civil rights workers who were murdered in Mississippi. Cheney, Schwerner, and Goodman.
Yeah.
My freshman year in college, I was working after. I had an after school job at United Parcel. service, you know, UPI, United Power, and we were loading trucks. It was the best job I ever had because it was a unionized job and they paid a really nice rate. It was kind of backbreaking because I was this little tiny guy and we were loading trucks from 4 to 8 every day. And one day, one of the guys I was working with, I mean, it was 1964, I remember it well, it was in April or May of 1964. He walked up to me and said, well, I'll see you, Johnson. And I said, what do you see? He said, I'm leaving. I said, where are you going? He said, I'm going to Mississippi. And I said, why? He said, to register to vote. And I said to myself, better him than me, you know. I thought he was a jerk, you know. And then later when I saw his picture in the paper, this Andrew Goodman with Cheney and Schwerner.
That was one of them?
It helped. Andrew Goodman, he was one of the 3.
Oh, wow.
And I was apolitical. I couldn't understand why he was going. These were 3 civil rights workers who were murdered by the KKK, by racists in Mississippi in 1964. They were going to help black people register to vote because at that time, even though we had a right to vote, black people were intimidated and most of us, particularly in the South, never even voted. And they were killed for their efforts. And I worked with him. I was 18 at the time, he was 19. And you know, things like that, even though it didn't affect me right away, they're seeds that are planted.
Right.
And eventually, you begin to ask yourself, you know, what's going on, what's happening. And I think that in some way affected me.
It's a big ship, and it's very...
Later on, when I thought about people who were willing to make sacrifices, and I said, you know, basically just to follow their conscience.
Yeah.
I said, well, you know, maybe it's something I should do.
Yeah.
I should think about it at least.
You know, when we were talking about how well we were doing, we realized all of us are doing better than the country. We were not concerned about ourselves personally. We were concerned about the
I
country.
was ready for some fresh air, even if it was mixed with jet fuel. But yeah, and up there you
paid attention to what happened to you and many other early resistors. But you did time? Did you wind up?
Yes. We were. So we were arrested in June, and the trial was in September, and we were convicted then. So the first 2 months.
Okay, I just wanted to say that was J.J. Johnson speaking, who was war resistor, as you can hear, plainly hear. Also, Michael Wong was also speaking, asking questions. Mike is also a GI resistor. He, as he heard what was happening about in Vietnam, he decided he wanted to get out. I just want to say we want to try and put more of these films together in the future. Stay tuned. We'll do a little more organized. We'll have a little segments so that we can do a segment at each one of the upcoming shows. So I look forward to seeing you all next month on the 4th Saturday of the month with Veterans for Peace Forum. Thanks to Karma DeBella and Jim Lockhart for helping produce this program.